Still
Like
low.
how you're improvising the music.
I respect artists' copyrights, okay?
Oh, okay. I'll sing along.
Hello, YouTube. We are live. And we decided to dance our way
Like how you're
in.
improvising the music.
Oh, I respect artists' copyrights, okay?
Hold on.
Oh, okay. I'll sing.
Got some feedback happening there. We are live.
Like, that sounds familiar.
We are live, guys. I'm Yank Spears. This is Lindsay Mitchell of The Vital Side. She's the founder of Vital Side. She's trained as a physician assistant and worked as a physician assistant many years ago. She's also trained in neurolinguistic programming, EFT, and a few other different fun modalities to really help people to rewire their brains, their autonomic nervous systems, and just come out ahead in life, especially for people who are coming through chronic illness or just having any chronic symptoms, really moving them forward. I know she used to have Lyme's disease and moved through that in you were bedridden for about 8 or 10 months. Tell us a little bit about you, Lindsay.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Bianca. I've loved getting to know you and just, forming this friendship over the last year. It's just been so fun, by the way. Such a wonderful asset to have you, and all that you do. So excited to know you and collaborate. So yes, my name is Lindsay. I work with people who have chronic illnesses, and I specifically focus on the brain. I had Lyme disease. I was bedridden for probably about 4 months, was like the actual bedridden part, but had chronic symptoms for months and months and months. And once I became so aware that these chronic symptoms weren't going away with the modalities I was using, I knew I needed to do something differently. So that's when I started to think out of the box, out of my Western medicine mind, and think about different tools I could use. And that's really when I started to learn about brain retraining. I think my first introduction was reading Dr. Norman Deutsch's book, The Brain That Changes Itself. And that was my intro to brain retraining and how when we have a chronic illness, our brain can get stuck in that. Bless you.
Oh, excuse me.
Bless you. Get stuck in that chronic stress response. So when I learned that, that was such an aha moment for me.
Oh, excuse me.
Bless you. And she's gone. And she's back. It's running all over the place. So this, it was a journey for me, having this chronic illness, having the diagnosis, being bedridden, learning about brain retraining, and then it all kind of clicked when I learned about that. You good? We're good. Can you laugh for sneezing? Does that work?
I don't know if it takes it away. Oh.
Well, that may be another episode. So brain retraining was such a big part of my life because what it did was it started to put focus on what is possible for me, what I can do. It started to connect me with my natural resilience and ultimately brought me to the point of recovery. It took me about 8 months to start using mental exercises to access that growth and repair parasympathetic response. And not only get my life back, I hear people say that, and I'm like, it really furthered me. It took me to the next level. It taught me so much, this process of brain retraining and all that I'm capable of. So now I teach it to other people and other people who have Lyme disease or other chronic conditions or chronic symptoms of anxiety, fatigue, chronic pain. And yeah, I love it. It's absolutely so much fun.
Yes, and I love that you say it's so much fun, and I love that you bring fun to it, because I think this is why we connected, because through our different paths and different modalities and different lives that we've had, our experiences have taught us that it doesn't have to be serious, it doesn't have to be hard. It can be fun, it can be easy, it can be a really enjoyable process to heal, to reprogram your mind, to create change, to shift your habits, to shift your beliefs, and actually come out as a different version of yourself. And it's interesting that you said that as well, that, you know, instead of just getting your life back, I know I have a client and friend who had a stroke, and she said the same. She's like, people wanted, they're like, oh, I want to go back to the way things were. And she's like, no, you don't. That's like an impending stroke. Like, you don't want to go back there. You want to go to a place where, you know, you are healthy, and that's not kind of something that's on your horizon. So, yeah, I really resonate with that message as well.
And I think that we can be so regimented, you know, in our healing process, or okay, what brought me to the point where I had the stroke, or what do I do now, and what steps do I take? And when we apply that same mentality to our process of healing or our brain retraining journey, what that can do is create some rigidity. And so when we experience that rigidity, it can make us really resistant to keep going with it, to make changes. And so, you know, I like to say brain retraining. It can feel really intimidating, even those words like brain retraining, but it can be so fun, and there can be structure to it. I think that's important. But it's important also to know that we can also personalize the approach. We're retraining our brains all the time, whether we're laughing or doing a structured protocol or gardening. We're always making changes to our brains. So let's make it fun. Let's make it more about what kind of learning style we have and who we are.
Yeah, for sure. Do you want to break that down? Like, for people who are watching who are like, what do you mean gardening can change how your brain works? Like, do you want to go into that a little for people?
Sure, since we're nerding out on neuroscience.
Yeah, it's like, let's get to the nerding. And this is exactly the fun of it. It's like neuroscience sounds so serious and so like brainy, and like, am I even going to understand that? And that's the beauty in what Lindsay does, is to really help people to do that with ease and with fun.
Right. And to go, I was talking to a practitioner earlier this week, you know, to go off what you just said, so many modalities retrain our brains. We just don't say that they do. We're always making changes to our brains, creating new neural pathways or connections in our brains. And the same way we're doing that, we already have neural pathways in our brain associated to our past experiences, what we have done, who we were yesterday, who we are today, who we were as a 5-year-old. So we have these neural pathways in our brains. And when we do something totally different from what we did yesterday, maybe something totally new, maybe you've never gardened in your life, and you go out there and, you know, there's a shovel sitting there. You pick up the shovel and maybe you bring up a YouTube video on gardening for dummies or gardening 101, right? Like a fun kind of video to help you start gardening. Well, then you learn about how to shovel, how to use soil in the process, where to put seeds, how to plant, what time of year, all of the stuff that you're learning. And what that does is create a new neural pathway in your brain related to this topic of gardening. So when we retrain our brains, how I like to think about it is this intentional way to choose what neural pathways we take. And sometimes we feel like we can't control that or don't have control of that. So an example of that is if you're, you know, sitting here at your desk and some pop-up pops up that you just don't want to see, and it's right there in front of you, and you're like, oh, I don't want to see that, but it's there, whatever. If that's like a picture of a, weird clown or something like that, and you're like, take it away. So that is kind of without your control. And so that is a very silly example of the way that we can feel like we don't have control over the things we do, the things we see, the neural pathways we take. And oftentimes that like silly clown example can be used throughout our lives, in our work lives, in our day-to-day, in the activities that we do, in the things we choose to watch on TV, in our own thoughts. But the idea with brain retraining is, all right, well, let's focus on what we can control, how to intentionally create new neural pathways in our brains. For example, if gardening is something that you want to do, you're going to get the books. You're going to go to the library. You're going to check out the books. You're going to research stuff. You're going to, get some new gardening boots and gloves and all of these things. And so we can choose what neural pathways we create based on the things that we do, the thoughts that we pay attention to, our actions, our behaviors, and we can do all that. And I know it sounds easier said than done, but that's why I teach a structured approach on how to do that. And a very first thing that I always tell people to do in VitalSight and in general is let's start to pay attention to some old neural pathways that just don't serve you anymore. Like, for example, I don't have control over my life, or I am stuck, or I find it hard to heal, or something like that. So shedding some awareness and light on those old beliefs will help you to start thinking, okay, now what? What new neural pathways can I create? What new beliefs can I have that are going to take me to the next level, that are going to create health and happiness and peace in my life?
I love that. And I'm totally on the same page with that. It's like shine the light of awareness, and that's where you can start. Like once you're aware, you can create change. And what kind of changes do you see people making in your work? Like when they come to you and maybe they have this belief like, oh, it's hard for me to heal. Like what do you see people shifting into and embodying and switching up in their minds?
So it's interesting because that same belief, I had a client who was telling me the other day that was one of her initial beliefs. And she has been in VitalSight for about 2 months. She's in the membership and, has chronic conditions, chronic symptoms. And one of the biggest beliefs that she had was, I can't heal. And really, this isn't going to work for me. Maybe it works for other people, but it doesn't work for me. So one of the first things she did, just using some structured protocols, was start to identify how often that belief pops up in her day to day. And stuff that she didn't even realize was related to the belief, she started to understand, oh, that's very clear. For example, if you choose to say no to a specific event, right? Your neighbor invites you over for a backyard barbecue, and you say, no, I can't do that. And you give a reason. And then if you think about that kind of reason or excuse that you gave, is that a response that you gave because of an old belief pattern? So maybe that old belief pattern is like, okay, well, if I go out, I won't have control of my environment, and I, won't be able to know what I'm going to eat or what I'm going to smell or what I'm going to do. And ultimately, there's a way to kind of map it back even further. And are all those beliefs based on some evidence that you've heard from a practitioner or that you've read online about, well, you can't heal. You're never going to get over this. So just make yourself comfortable. And all of a sudden, everything else in your life is impacted by that one belief. And I think it's so important because a lot of people, me being one of these people, don't often, again, choose that belief. It's almost like it's thrust on you by things that you read, things that people tell you. And it's like all of a sudden I have adopted that belief. But was that belief even mine to begin with? No, I'm a pretty hopeful person and I believe in myself and I believe in other people. So it's interesting to track it back. So this client in particular noticed a lot of the decisions that she made and her daily actions were traceable back to that old belief pattern of, well, I can't heal. I just have to make myself comfortable and I'll be this way forever. Once she recognized that awareness, that shedding of the light, then she was able to strategically say, oh, okay, well, I understand that every time I feel this way or do this thing, that's an old belief. So what can I do differently? What's another activity that I can substitute out, right? And that's kind of, getting into habit change, which we do talk about in Vital Side Ed. But it's this process of, okay, what if I did something differently in a new way, in a different way, created a new neural pathway associated to who I do want to be, who I am, and shedding some light on that. So 2 months in, this client says, one of the first things that she found was this sense of peace and ease within herself, that her symptoms weren't hers to take on, but she can now understand when her body physically reacts that this is just a result of this patterned programming that has happened, that has occurred as a result of old belief patterns, as a result of being in that chronic stress response, which is what I specifically work with for people. So now, she was just telling me how thankful she is and how she feels like she's such a better mom and just has more strength and is seeing continued change in her physical symptoms. And that's really the goal, is, finding that symptom relief, and I call it your natural resilience, which is when you connect with that growth and repair state more and more, and find your natural resilience that you have.
Yeah, I love that. And I think within that as well, that peace and that detachment from, as you said, like, not, the symptoms aren't hers. She doesn't have to own those anymore, and she doesn't have to own those thoughts and beliefs and make them a part of who she is or her reality. It's a real identity shift as well, and just opening up to so many more possibilities for, like, well, if that's not me, then who can I be? Or, like, what can I achieve? What can I actually do? And that's, I think, where the fun begins, where you can actually go, hey, like, you're in the creator seat, right? And my audience know I go on about this all the time, that we're creating our realities. Mm-hmm. And that's why I love this. And guys on the line, there's 6 of you guys right now. Say hello, let us know where you're from, firstly. And secondly, if you've got questions, we've got about 10 minutes left, so pop those through. If you've got any questions or you want to ask Lindsay anything, feel free to pop those through. I do have my eye on the comments section here on YouTube. And also, same deal if you're on the replay, send through a comment. I'm going to be watching for the comments coming through there as well. So what I want to ask you, Lindsay, is that's what I'm hearing is, like, okay, step 1 is kind of like, let's get the awareness happening. Because unless we're aware of a habit or a repeated thought, like a pattern of thought or behavior, we can't really change it. And then what I'm hearing as well is that these are my words, like detaching from the outcome, or just being the observer and going, okay, well, that's something I adopted, but I don't need to hold on to. That's key as well. Are there, like, some specific steps that, without obviously giving away the magic of all your work, that are there like 3 steps or 5 steps or something that you could share here to help people to retrain their minds and change their habits for the better?
Sure. So it's funny because when people ask me this question, whether it's on my Instagram or another place where I'm asked to kind of share it quickly, I'm always like, well, I teach a 10-hour course on this. So that's probably the most informative way to find this out. So what I'll do is I'll give an example of what to use when you have a specific symptom or thought, maybe to retrain your brain. So sometimes we can experience like a thought of hopelessness. So this comes along with that belief too of like, okay, I won't heal. This isn't going to work for me. I'm never going to heal. And when we experience or become aware of that thought, it can cause this kind of feeling of depression, right? Or hopelessness, or this lack of motivation. So the first thing that you can do, the first step that I'll give you here, is identify that response as the freeze response. So the freeze response is the nervous system survival response, often associated to feelings of hopelessness, despair. We can feel a little bit brain foggy. It's basically our brains coming online and saying, hey, I'm in survival mode, and the best way for me to survive in this moment is to react in freeze. That's kind of freeze, shrink up, and hide. So if you ever feel like you're tuning out, or I have a lot of clients say my brain goes offline, that can be the freeze response. So this is kind of a fun exercise. I'll be a little complicated here, but I think for those of you watching, you'll enjoy it. Print out a picture of a stop sign. Okay, the red is the freeze response. The yellow is the fight or flight response, and that's that stress response. That's that stay and fight, heart rate increases, breathing rapidly, anxiety, stress, hypervigilance, hyperawareness. And the green is that go, growth and repair response. All of these responses are part of that autonomic nervous system. So when you feel a certain way and you don't know how you feel, or maybe a belief pops up and you're like, oh my gosh, what does that mean? Go print out this picture of the traffic light and say, is this related to an autonomic nervous system response? Is it red, freeze? Is it yellow, fight, flight, react? Or is it green, breathe, growth and repair, digest, rest, restore? So the idea here is, if it's red or yellow, you want to get to that green response. So how can I retrain, right? Now that we're aware of what's going on, what's the next step? If you are in that red zone, what is the opposite of red, freeze? So to create a new neural pathway, whether you've identified that old belief or you've kind of experienced that feeling, that sense of hopelessness or lack of motivation, to create a new neural pathway in the brain, I always like to think of the opposite of whatever survival response I'm in. So maybe the opposite of that red, which is freeze, is vibrancy, activity, motion, being loud, right? Because when you freeze, you're like this. And when you're doing the opposite, it's kind of this like loud, vibrant, I'm here, right? So freeze response, the opposite of that would be like to jump up and say, I decide, I'm here, right?
I'm here.
That's right. Bianca's here. I'm here. I decide. And you jump up. And what that does in the brain is creates that new neural pathway of the brain kind of goes out of this old neural pathway associated to this freeze response, prunes away at that and creates a new neural pathway associated to vibrancy or awake, alive, alert, like this response, right? So even if you don't feel necessarily vibrant, you're creating that new neural pathway, communicating a new way of being to your brain. Like you're saying, I'm in that creator seat. So that's for the red response. If you're in that yellow, fight, flight, gotta go, gotta react, sensitive, that kind of response. What I think, when you think of the opposite of that, Bianca, what do you think of? Opposite of fight or flight?
Opposite of fight or flight. Well, I guess it's to calm down. But for me personally, when I'm like anxious, let's say, being calm and still is difficult. So maybe like for me would be still moving, but like not as rapidly. Like I notice I'll try and slow my breathing if I'm like frantic.
So that's a good point, because we're all so different. So someone who's maybe used to operating, in this way of being that vibrant person, and then that kind of like fight or flight anxiety kind of creeps up. It's like, okay, well, if I go to the exact opposite, that's going to kind of make me a little bit weird, a little bit irky. So, okay, what can I do that will help me to transition into that, like, okay, peaceful, more like slow moving? And it could just be that, it could be that like more gentle, soft movement. And okay, and I noticed my breathing was just really increasing. So now maybe instead of forcing myself to do this like deep breathing, I'm just gonna so that's a quick inhale, and quick exhale, and you can kind of do it to a soft, gentle movement. So you're kind of easing yourself into that peaceful state. And so everyone is so different when it comes to that. If you can go from like that hyperdrive fight flight state to a sense of like, okay, let me sit and breathe, that's wonderful. But if you need that little bit of a transition, okay, let me ease myself into it. For me, fight or flight, when I think of the opposite, what I like to do is kind of, a lot of people have grounding exercises. I like to really connect with myself. That's a way for me to kind of ground and realize like, oh, I'm in this body, right? I'm here on this earth. So I like to kind of do a little self-hold, or I call it self-hug, and kind of like little rocking motion. And maybe after you kind of do that rocking motion, starting to pay attention to your breath a little bit. Okay. Right. And so that to me is really comforting, and creates that opposite of that yellow fight flight response. So all of these things, no matter what you choose to do, whether it's that soft movement, that immediate breath, or that self hug, what you're doing is you're creating a new neural pathway in your brain, and you're saying, okay, I had that moment of like, ah, or that moment of, ooh, and now I was able to change it. And that's where that natural resilience comes in, because we live in a world that is always changing. We know it's 2021. We're here for it, but we can access our own natural resilience and arm ourselves with these tools so that when we're aware of these survival responses that come on, okay, well, I'm in the creator seat. I decide, I can choose. That's where you become aware and then use that tool, that technique that makes sense to you in that moment to access your natural resilience.
Lindsay, can you hear me?
I can, yes. You're totally normal on my screen.
Your sound dropped out for a second there.
Can you hear me okay? It all looks okay on my end.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's because I'm looking on YouTube and you're still talking on YouTube.
Oh.
Zoom. Love the choo-choo train breathing, Lindsay. Damien from here in Australia, in Queensland, said there's Christian saying hello from Germany, and Kim Keller saying hello, Kim from Northern Michigan here. I love the breathing, and I love that you're saying the opposite response. And I like, even thinking about it now, obviously I use laughter quite a bit in my work, and that can be an opposite for me. If I'm really angry, laughter can really diffuse that energy for me and shift it. And yeah, I know you have to go. I've just looked at the time and I'm like, oh, she gotta run. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I'm looking forward to doing more, guys who are here on YouTube. there's more coming from Lindsay and I together. So stay tuned for that. Feel free to follow her at My Vital Side on Instagram, and let us know how you went. Damien said he loved the choo-choo train breath. I'd absolutely love to hear how you guys went with these tools, these tips, and if you got any questions, drop them below as well. Much love from both of us, from both sides of the world. We'll see you again soon.
Thank you, Bianca.
Thanks,
Bye, everyone.
Lindsay.